What the heck is going on in British Columbia? That's the question I've been asking for the past couple of days. Hello, I'm Brian Lilley, political columnist for the Toronto Sun, and to try and figure out what's going on in BC's politics, where they're having a huge upheaval, joined by Vaughn Palmer. He's the columnist on politics for the Vancouver Sun. No relation except parent company, Post Media. Vaughn, you guys you've had an NDP government for several years now. It's getting long in the tooth, and as often happens, people decide they want change. But you went from the official opposition being the change to somebody else to the official opposition dropping out of the election. Is that what's happened? I mean, fill me in here.
Well, the official opposition leader, Kevin Falcon, had a news conference yesterday and basically put his party on hold and broke with his own caucus. So, one of the laugh lines out here is that we've seen leaders in BC force out by their caucus. But in this case, we've got a caucus forced out by its leader. So the bits and pieces are lying around the political landscape. And the only thing I can say about BC is that many places have elections, but here in British Columbia, we tend to prefer earthquakes, and they happen every now and then. A political party shatters, it's get replaced by another one, and we soldier on.
So Kevin Falcon is the leader of BC United. Now,
Yep.
sounds like a soccer team, but it's the rebranding of the old BC Liberals, which
Yes.
for folks that don't know, and you can explain it better, it's not really the Liberal Party in the same way Justin Trudeau is the Liberal Party. It's the free market coalition, kind of like the Saskatchewan Party. It brings together everybody that's not a New Democrat. So I would have assumed that he would have cruised to victory when voters were ready to say, you know what, we've had enough of the NDP and Premier David Eby, and we're going to move on. How did Falcon end up in third place in the polls and essentially denouncing and his own party and saying they're not going to run?
Well, if you're going to change your brand, we know this from the private sector, and Falcon comes from there. You better have, if it's a well known brand, you better have a pretty big budget for rebranding. The BC Liberals had won 4 elections in a row out here in British Columbia. They'd taken the most votes in 2 other elections. So Falcon said he thought the voters were confused. Most political parties winning 4 elections in a row would go, that's not a bad level of confusion to have. But anyway, he changed the name to BC United, but he neglected to do what any private corporation would do, which is put aside a few $1,000,000 to rebrand. He didn't.
So they
He
didn't
sort of,
run ads in the newspaper or on TV
no,
or
no.
online saying, "Hey, we've changed our name, but here's why we're good."
Yeah, and he didn't do another thing, which, if you're going to change the name of a political party, is remind everybody that you're the party that actually governed this province for most of the last 20 years. So we've changed our name, but we follow in the tradition of social credit, which governed British Columbia for most of 40 years, and the BC Liberals, and now we're calling ourselves BC United, but we're the same. For lack of a better term, in BC, we have the NDP and we have the not the NDP party, and it's been called different things, but its principal objective is to keep the NDP out of power, and it worked fairly well. So Falcon goes around with BC United, and eventually the opinion polls say most British Columbians who have lives and are busy and don't pay much attention to elections between voting days, I never heard of this thing, BC United. Falcon makes another terrible mistake. He forces out one member of his caucus in a big show of force. Kevin Falcon's going to show that I'm in charge and I make decisions. The guy he throws out is John Rustad. Turns out, sitting at the curb in BC politics, idling away, is the BC Conservative Party. It's never done very well. Last time it formed a government in British Columbia was 1928. Last time it even won a seat was in 1978. But there's something else politically happening in Canada. This guy, Pierre Poilievre, he's riding a populist wave. he's called the Conservative Party. And it turns out the Conservative Party thing is a pretty good resonance out here in British Columbia. So
You know,
Rustad
under
goes
Steve
to the Conservatives.
under Stephen Harper, the Conservatives did well in British Columbia. For the past while, it had been a three-way race between the Liberals, the NDP, and the Conservatives federally.
Yep.
But now they're doing really well. But I just dabble in BC politics, provincial politics. Not like you, but I remember somebody saying, "Oh, you got to check out the BC Conservatives," and this is a few years back. And I looked at them and I said, "Well, they're a bunch of unelectable lunatics." And they said,
Mhm.
"Yeah, that's the problem." So, how have they gone from unelectable fringe party to this? Is it all on the strength of John Rustad?
Well, to some degree, he's a very hardworking guy. And, the rap on Rustad was, well, he's just surfing a wave generated by Pierre Poilievre. Initially, that was true. But, you know, Rustad went out and looked at the issues that Poilievre had raised out here, carbon tax and other things, public safety, open drug use, and he adopted the same position. So, the rap was, well, you're misleading people. You're pretending you're Pierre Poilievre. But if you have roughly the same positions as Pierre Poilievre, you're really misleading people. And he started to take off as the conservative brand in British Columbia. And there was enough overlap between his positions, populist, right of center, uh, those of Poilievre, that it was a valid comparison. And he started to climb. And BC United, Kevin Falcon, were in denial for the longest time. The polls are BS. You can't believe the polls.
Yeah.
We're going to turn this thing around. They're a bunch of crackpots and all that. And month after month, week after week, Rustad and his party kept climbing in the polls until BC United fell to third place and then fell to fourth place behind the Greens. And finally, what we saw this week, Kevin Falcon was sort of the last person in British Columbia to acknowledge that his party was going nowhere. And here we go. He has a press conference yesterday with John Rustad, and they've
So,
worked out a deal.
the BC United is going to stand down. Will
Yep.
all the current MLAs abide by that, or are some going to say no? To heck with that. I'm a BC United person. Are they going to stick around and try and fight it out?
Well, they may, but a couple of things that Falcon announced yesterday. He's not resigning as leader. He's still the leader of the party. The party board is not stepping down and winding up the party. What they're doing is stopping. No campaigning, no fundraising, no spending money, and they're withdrawing their candidates, the nominated ones.
Now,
So
there
they
there isn't
basically parked
there isn't
themselves.
currently an election on, right? I mean, the election's coming. I think it has to be by
Yes.
October 19th, but we're not in a
Yes.
writ period, right?
No, we're not in a writ period. We haven't
Okay.
come to nomination day when candidates are actually made official. And near as we can tell, they can do all this. So the unhappy people out there, who are about 50 of them nominated to run for BC United, and some of them, about a dozen, are incumbent MLAs, they're kind of parked at the moment. We're not sure what they're going to do. But the trade-off in this deal, so Falcon agrees to shut down his party and stop campaigning and
Yeah.
end the threat of vote splitting. In return, John Rustad agreed to have negotiations on the candidate lineup. And Rustad suggested that he may be open to accepting some of these BC United people if they join the Conservatives as Conservative candidates. So the next few days, it's going to be a negotiation on this. I don't know how many they'll pull off, but the thought is they may be able to placate at least some of the incumbent MLAs, maybe a star nominee or two, by having them become conservatives, which will create the semblance of a sort of merger and a trade off for those people that you've correctly said were caught totally off guard by this. The negotiations were secret. They were done over a period of about 72 hours, and who are wondering what happens to me. Some of them will disappear, and some of them may resurface as Conservatives. A few BC United MLAs have already crossed the floor and joined the Conservatives, so there's precedent for this.
It has been fascinating to watch. I know the polls are tight.
Yes.
Uh, we don't have new polling since then,
Nope.
since this announcement. But if you're looking at the numbers, I mean, I would have to imagine that even as you say, BC United's fallen to fourth, that if they even get half of, the Conservatives get half of the BC United support, that would put them ahead of the NDP and the favorite to win the election.
I would say it's competitive. Campaigns matter a lot, and a lot can happen in the remaining few weeks before the election. But the one more or less consistent rule in British Columbia politics since the NDP's predecessor, the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, emerged in 1933, as we all learned in school. The one consistent thing in BC politics has been when not the NDP parties are united in a single party opposing the NDP, the NDP loses the election. When not the NDP parties are split, as they were up to yesterday, the NDP loses the election. So the NDP was counting on a vote split. We all know how that works nationally. It happens in other provinces. The NDP was counting on a vote split where they'd be able to win some seats with 40% of the vote, with 39% of the vote. And now the vote splitting is less likely. So it's still a fight to the finish between the NDP and the Conservatives, but it's not the kind of vote splitting that we were looking at up to yesterday. They announced it at 3 o'clock on Wednesday.
It's been fascinating. And what is also fascinating for me, I'm sitting in my office at Queen's Park, Ontario's legislature, and just a few minutes ago, I was walking past the door of Merritt Stiles. People may not know that she is the leader of the official opposition in Ontario as leader of the NDP because nobody talks about her. Maybe the NDP here should go out to British Columbia and find out how to be an effective political party rather than just a protest movement because you guys have an effective NDP and they govern from time to time. And that doesn't happen in other parts of the country quite like it does in BC.
No, they've got a pretty good record out here. Not quite as impressive as the NDP did in Saskatchewan for decades or Manitoba for a number of years, but they've gotten a lot better at governing in BC. They learned a lot of lessons from the 1990s when they ended their term in office with a near wipeout. They have been more pragmatic this term, and British Columbia has shifted. The demographic is a little different out here, and all that is a factor too. So I would say Angus Reid, the granddaddy of polling in this country, said the other day, if you must bet on the BC election, bet on an NDP win for another term, but don't bet very much. BC tends to produce close elections, and this has really changed the landscape. And I think we're in for a pretty wild ride between now and October the 19th.
All right. Well, hopefully we can check in with you
Oh, yeah.
or then or around then and see how things turn out. Vaughn, thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate you asking.
Let us know what you think. Drop a comment down below. Share this on social media and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.